All right, so first, I see a lot of new faces here this year, so I wanted to start by introducing myself if I haven't talked to you or met you yet. My name is Julie Irvin, and I'm the Manager of Training and Development for Tribute. I've been here for 26 years, but the last 7 years I've spent doing training and development. One of my duties is to be the co-coordinator of this conference, so if you have any suggestions or comments to share with me, Lauren and I both welcome them. I am not opposed to bribery, so what works best with me is food or puppies. Just throwing that out there. All right. So first and most importantly, let me get this going here. No, that's not what I wanted. Oops, let's bring this back here. I need my mouse back. I'm going to try this one more time because I was really excited about this. Okay, here we go. Volume's a little bit too low. Anyway, I wanted to welcome you all back to our first in-person event since 2019. Some of us were here in this room, in this hotel back then, and we had no idea what we were in store for. So welcome back. Susie said it this morning, and I echoed the same. We're so glad to see your faces, and we're really excited that we've got some new faces here this year. All right, so how many of you, raise your hand, how many of you knew what that reference was? Oh, thank God. I thought I was going to get a bunch of blank stares, so I'm not completely out of touch with the youngins yet. All right. So I just wanted to start off. I wanted to give our developers some love. We see them, a couple of them, up here every year for TribNet, but you haven't gotten the chance to meet all of them. We actually have a lot of them here today, which is not totally typical. But I'm continually amazed at how well these guys work together, how innovative they are, and I'm just really impressed and honored to work with them. And we've really assembled a talented team. Some of them have been with us many, many years. Some of us have been with us for a handful of years, but without them, we wouldn't have such a great product. Everybody's pictured up here because I asked people's permission to share their picture. So if they did not specifically send their picture, I didn't put it on here. The people that are not pictured are Cameron Armstrong, who's one of our developers, Eric Garling, who is our QA person, and oh my gosh, I think I just spaced one. Thank you, Lance Powell, who's been with us many, many years. But starting from the upper left corner and moving clockwise, we have Tom Noble, who has been with us many years and just recently took on the role of being the manager of development at Tribute and has just done a bang-up job, although these guys don't need a whole lot of leading. They all work very well together. Then we have Ben Stickle. Joey Lagucki is our newest developer, and he has already proven to be very valuable to the team. Don Benson, most of you know him, especially if you're on PPAB. He's been kind of organizing our PPAB meetings every month. Paige Cathy and Caleb Wagner. So let's just give them a little round of applause. All right, we have been very, very productive this year. So I have an hour today to share some of our new features, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that I'm just scratching the surface of what we've done. They've always been very productive in our development team, but I'm really impressed with what they've been able to get done. So if you want to see the complete list of everything that's done, all of our release notes are on our self-service center. So go out and take a look at those. There's lots of bugs that have been fixed, and there's lots of new stuff that's been implemented. And just bear with me as I'm going through our slides. I do have slide notes here that I'll be glancing at, so I hope you'll give me some grace. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't forget to share anything with you about some of these new features. So our agenda today is, of course, to go through some of our new features, but I did want to cover a couple of things regarding PPAB and what that's going to look like moving forward. So most of you have at least heard the acronym PPAB, and that stands for Program Priority Assignment Board. And up until recently, their duties were they were elected members, so customers were elected to that board, and they would review a list of requested enhancements twice a year. And one of them was here at the TribNet meeting. And we would go through a big old stack of projects and read through them and whittle them down to a list of, say, 10 at the end of the day. And that's how we determined what projects we were going to develop that year by that process. Also through the years, it's been a pretty frequent request from our other users to make that project list available to everybody to read, which we were absolutely on board with, but we could never find a proper forum or format to do that. It's a pretty thick list, pretty unwieldy, until now. So for the past year, the PPAB has been working on kind of improving the process and figuring out a new way forward with determining what gets ranked and what gets implemented. So they came up with an ideas portal, and some of you may have seen an email about that. So what this means is that moving forward, everybody can have access to this portal, and all of our enhancement requests will be on this portal. It's called the AHA portal. We're calling it the TrulinX Ideas portal. You have the ability to vote on projects, comment on them, and what that means for PPAB, well, let me back up a sec. If you want to know more about the Ideas portal, our support manager, Jamie Schott, is doing a session twice this week on how this works, how you access it. So I'm not going to go into those details. The reason I bring it up here in this session is that this week we're going to be voting in new PPAB members because some of their terms have expired. So if you are interested in being on the PPAB, I wanted to let you know that because of this change, the functionality of the PPAB has changed a little bit. So they are no longer going to be the people that go through and rank things. What they're going to do is they're going to look at this ideas portal, and they're going to take the top voted items off of that portal, and they will then serve as an advisory committee to our development team. So you guys, everybody, will have the ability to decide what gets worked on. And then what they're going to do, PPAB, is just work on the implementation and design of that from a user standpoint. So you won't have to sit through a meeting and go through a big old list of projects. So that's one thing you won't have to do if you're on PPAB. But also, in the past, that was kind of, to be on PPAB, there was a little bit of a travel requirement. At minimum, you would have to be here at the TribNet meeting to be in that PPAB meeting. But now, PPAB is meeting on Zoom every month, once a month. So this is a virtual commitment and and there's no travel requirement. So the persons that are serving on the PPAB we would ideally want to have a diverse amount of experience with the system so that you can kind of be on that, be effective in that advisory kind of role. And then just everybody as a whole with this new ideas portal, you get to stay engaged on a more regular basis with what gets worked on and what we're doing at TrulinX. So go to Jamie's session. I would encourage everybody we want as many people touching that ideas portal as possible, because the more input we have, the better product we're able to offer to you guys. All right, so without further ado, we will start with our enhancements. So this first new screen is called Prospect Maintenance. We already had some prospect functionality in TrulinX, but we had one particular customer request this functionality, and I thank Barry for giving me some insight into what triggered this request. So in their situation, they were getting information about prospects to their accounting department a variety of different ways. The purpose of having this new screen was really just to eliminate double and triple entry. So they were sending stuff, via email, a phone call, in their intranet site, and it was just a kind of a messy way of kind of getting that information to their accounting department. So they were looking for a way to streamline the entry process, but they didn't want to record, they didn't want this record usable for new orders until it had been properly set up. So this screen starts the process with minimal information, and the person entering doesn't have to know all of the coding required for customer maintenance. So if you've been in that screen, you know there's lots of fields you have to fill in. Once accounting completes the prospect screen, the record can be imported into customer maintenance, saving double entry. Now, this screen, they're using it to mainly be used by the accounting department. You, of course, can determine on your own if this is useful for you and how you want to use this screen. So just starting off, you can see that in that screen, you just have basic contact information for the most part. And then I just want to highlight some of the information on the right side of the screen. So when the record is initially set up, the status is going to default to active. There's 3 other statuses I'm going to discuss in a moment. And you see that the selling location is required. The person who created this prospect record will be set in the entered by field. And then when the prospect can be converted to a customer, usually accounting will go in and set the status on this record to approved for entry. When they change that status to approved for entry, then the sales rep and territory fields will become enabled. And then, of course, if the prospect is no longer an active prospect, the status can be changed to inactive. So to go along with this functionality, so we talked about the accounting person setting the status to approved for entry. When they do that, we have added a button in customer maintenance called Import Prospect. And when you're ready, you can go into customer maintenance. You'll create a customer number just like you normally do. Then you'll click your Import button. And when that button is clicked, you'll get this pop-up box. And what's in that pop-up box are only the prospect records that are marked as approved for entry. You just select that prospect record and it will import that information into customer maintenance. Back on the prospect maintenance screen after that import, the TrulinX customer number will be added, and the person who assigned the prospect to a customer user ID will be populated, and then the status will be changed to assigned to customer. Then to go along with that, we added a system parameter under accounts receivable. You have the option to delete the prospect record after they've been imported into customer maintenance. That will default to checked, or unchecked, I'm sorry. We have enhanced our item custom search screen to return an exact match if there is one. Previously, if you had an item and entered that exact value in the search, all the items that had those values would be returned instead of just the item that had only that value. So for example, if I was searching for the item F4, it would return every item that had F4 in it. So that was taking a lot of time to return information to the screen in some cases. So this enhanced version is going to allow a seed value to be entered as a search term, and then an exact match will be returned where possible. Now there is an existing system parameter we want you to review. If you load, I don't remember what release this is on, I apologize. There's an existing system parameter under the global section in system parameter maintenance, and it's called maximum records from lookup search. So the purpose of that system parameter was to control the number of records that were being returned to these search screens. So for some people that was taking a long time, so we were trying to limit what was being returned. So with this change, we're suggesting that people go back and review that system parameter setting. And if you have it set to something higher than 2000, we're kind of maybe suggesting ratcheting that down so that the search can be optimal for your company. The amount now showing in the less paid field on the invoice print has been changed to show deposits and standard payments. And then there's now a comment that should appear in the top of the footer comment section to state no payment due, when the amount due is 0 or negative. If you print preview a quote and you use the little send to email button that's in the upper right corner, you know that that opens up a brand new email message box. So what we're doing now is we're carrying over the quote number into the subject field on the quote. And I see a lot of people nodding because I've been hearing people ask for that for a long time. All right, so if you're familiar with entering fabrications or just bill of materials on a quote, you know that you have the option to select a BOM version number. So we can save pre-built structures in BOM maintenance in TrulinX. And when we enter that BOM on a quote, we can select that version number, and this system will import the structure in. All those components will import it into the quote. We could see that on the quote screen, and I believe on the sales order line screen, but it was never shown on the work order screen. So we had a customer request that this be carried over to the work order. So this is the original version that was selected during the initial entry of the BOM. But what's important to note is that after that initial version is selected, people can still modify that structure. They can delete and add components. So when you see this version number in there, just be mindful of the fact that it may not match the structure that that version number correlates with. Then we added a quick pay button in counter order maintenance. And really the purpose of this is just to reduce the number of clicks required to process a counter order payment. Because you usually had to enter your item information, then you'd have to go to tab 3, enter your payment method and your payment amount, save it, and if they were using more than one payment method to pay it, that was another record you had to add. So now, after you enter your item information, you hit the quick pay button, and you'll get this pop-up. And what payment methods show up in this box here is dependent on what your user ID has permissions to accept. So you may or may not be able to accept all 4 payment methods. Sorry, my P's are really hard on that microphone. After clicking a payment method, you're going to get prompted for a payment amount. And then that payment record is just going to get created under tab 3 automatically. Once you do that, then the quick pay button transforms into the checkout button. It's pretty nifty. And then you can check out your counter order like normal. Now, one note about when you choose the credit card option, depending on whether you integrate with WEX or not, I believe if you're integrated with WEX and you click that credit card button, you may or may not get that a box that comes up to ask you to choose a credit card or add a credit card, and then you can enter a payment amount and you'll be done. If you're not using WEX, all you're going to get is an additional prompt for an authorization number. All right, so internal fabrications. Those of you that do them, you know that the second to last step is to run the internal fab completion transaction, and that tells the system that the item is done being built, and that will remove items, components, and their costs from work in process and bring the parent item and the costs into stock. Then a year or two ago, we added this internal fab completion reversal transaction, because we had people ask, hey, when we do that, we want to be able to reverse it. So we added that. What we didn't do well until now, when we created that reversal transaction, particularly with regard to partial reversals, was we weren't honoring the proportional nature of particularly labor and burden. So we are now honoring that proportional flag of labor and burden so that if the remaining completed quantity ends up getting cost finalized, each labor record and burden record will have the same ratio of total completed cost to cost completed from fab as they did prior to the partial reversal. Okay, here's the big one. So you guys have probably been hearing and seeing emails about the SOAP changes and the big changes to the credit card module. So in 21.1, which just came out in the last few weeks, that will contain these SOAP changes. So we made big changes to that the credit card module. So before I kind of go into what those changes are and what that means, I just want to make sure that you read the addendum that is attached to the 21.1 release notes. That addendum contains all the information about the SOAP changes, so what you enter in what field and what that means, but it also contains some preliminary steps that you have to do before you load this release. So one of those steps I know is to contact WEX and tell them, hey, I'm loading the TrulinX release that contains the SOAP changes. They have to do something on their end so that your credit card functionality continues to work. So make sure you read that addendum and you complete those preliminary steps before you load the release, and that way you can make sure that everything keeps working after you load the release. All right, so Caleb, our developer who is heavily involved in making these changes, he was nice enough to boil this down into something that you and I can understand, because a lot of the changes they made are very technical and nothing that you or I would see on the front end. So he was kind enough to kind of boil these changes down, so I'm going to share that with you. So what you guys are going to see on your end from the user perspective hasn't changed very much. But what has changed is how TrulinX communicates with WEX and relays credit card information and other transactional information. So up until now, TrulinX has been communicating with WEX via a web API-based technology, and they'll still be doing that. But the main difference is the standard in which they're communicating with WEX. That's where the SOAP standard comes in. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. And the differences between the way it used to work and how it's working now are immense. But from a customer perspective, we've got a couple things that really means for you. So it boils down to a couple of changes. One, the SOAP protocol is, everything just locked up. The SOAP protocol is more secure than the legacy connection. So that'll help further protect you and your customers' data. And then upgrading to the WEX integration gives Tribute the ability to eventually utilize all the new features and integrations that WEX currently has and will have. And then right now you have the ability, I'm kind of going off the top of my head here because my mouse isn't working. Right now you have the ability to separate out by location. So, location. Yeah, and then merchant ID, right? So that just helps you utilize a lot of the reporting functions that are in WEX. So again, make sure, I'm trying to get this to work. Okay, let me see if this will work. I apologize, this locked up on me. There we go. All right. Okay, so make sure you read that addendum that comes with the release notes. And then those of you who have multiple locations probably already got an email from us. I think that email probably told you to call us. Sorry, I'm just adjusting myself here. Told you to call us after you load the release because we have to run a script on your system. Okay. So moving on to a little bit more credit card functionality. So previously, if a user added a credit card to TrulinX, the system would grab the email address from the customer maintenance record, and it would send that information to WEX along with the credit card. And WEX would use that email address to send the receipt to. Now, in situations, there are a couple situations where that wasn't practical. So if you have a cash customer, so a lot of you have just a generic cash customer set up in customer maintenance, that wouldn't necessarily have an email address. So there's no email address to send that receipt to. And then if the customer acknowledged to contact, for instance, wanted that receipt, there was no way to do that. So what we've done in the credit card maintenance screen is add an email field, so you can enter the email address of the person you want to receive that receipt.
How does that look for current records? So we convert to 21-1. Is that blank then for all those we just filled in over time? Or now?
Yeah. I believe you can go back and modify, records that already exist. And then, this will be blank moving forward for new records. And then I would assume then that this would always override what's in customer maintenance, the email address. Just for the credit card. Okay.
Is it defaulted to send an email every time that credit card is used?
All right, so I know you're looking at a blank slide now, so I want to take a minute to preface the slide. So if you're a Rexroth distributor, you may or may not know that they're now requiring their distributors to include a 9-character ship via code on all POs that are sent by EDI or email. So this code's going to tell Rexroth all sorts of information. Things like the parcel service, the freight carrier, the freight billing terms, and the freight service. So you might hear this referred to as a 2 carriers code or a matrix code. So we've made changes, so now the Rexroth distributors can assign that value to a TrulinX shipping method and then return that value on the PO when it's sent to Rexroth. So to facilitate those changes, we've done a couple of things. One is we've added a new screen called Rexroth Configuration Maintenance, and that's under the purchasing section of the menu. This is going to be a dual grid screen. So one grid is used to define which vendors are considered Rexroth vendors, and the second grid will be used to map TrulinX ship methods to the appropriate Rexroth carrier and service code. Now that carrier and service code, that will be provided to you by Rexroth in a spreadsheet, so you'll know what to enter there. And what we're going to do when you enter that is we will validate it for whether it's a required field and whether it's the proper character length. We will not validate whether it's the correct value. So Rexroth will be the one that tells you whether that's an incorrect value. All right, so when this feature is implemented, what you're going to have to do first is a couple setup steps. You're going to have to go in a program that's already existed in our system, but we've enhanced it a little bit to work with these Rexroth changes. You're going to go and define a vendor ship via code in vendor shipping method cross-reference maintenance. So you're going to define a vendor ship via code for your Rexroth vendor IDs for each and every shipping method you could possibly use on a PO to Rexroth. So you're probably thinking to yourself, how the heck do I know how many ship methods I use with Rexroth? So we wrote a little query, and I put it on the self-service center. This is going to go out and read all of your POs that have something in the vendor field that looks like the word Rexroth. And then it's going to list all of the ship via that are on those POs. So that'll give you a really good starting point on that list of what to enter in the vendor shipping cross-reference maintenance screen. One thing you should also do if you don't already have, in your vendor record for your Rexroth vendors, there is, obviously you go in there and you set your payment terms, your freight terms, but there's also an alternate terms and alternate freight terms. Make sure that those are set for your Rexroth vendors as well. So after that information's been entered, TrulinX is going to generate a matrix code for the purchase order when the purchase from vendor is associated with one of the vendors from this new config screen. So this kind of gives you a map of what it's providing to Rexroth. So each piece of that code that's going to be returned on that PO is going to provide some shipping information to them. And this is where it's going to appear when you send that PO to Rexroth via email. And then if you use EDI to send your POs to Rexroth, I have some information that you will need to relay to your EDI partner because your text file will need to be modified to accommodate this change. Are there any Rexroth distributors in the room? Okay. So if you get your pen ready, I'm going to give you some information that you can give your EDI vendor. So the ship matrix code is going to be exported on the H line, starting at position 662 with a length of 10 characters. Okay. So we talked about internal fabrication completion transaction before. That's just the last step, or the second to last step we run in the internal fab process. And before this change, we just had the stuff in the top half of the screen that you had to worry about. We have added disposition apply functionality to this screen. So the disposition apply transaction is still available on the menu as a standalone program, but we've added it here to save users a step when they discover there's a component that needs to be dispositioned. So you see that if you're not familiar with disposition apply, that's just to move components out of work in process, either back to stock or to scrap them. Okay, so let's move on to some system parameter changes. We've got quite a few, and a couple of them have a pretty big impact. So we've got a couple simple ones first. One, you can print the ship to address on quotes and acknowledgments. And then you can print the barcode on order acknowledgments and quotes, and by the way, on POs and invoices as well. That's just in a different section of system parameter maintenance. And that just makes it easier for Informa to search those documents when it has those barcodes on them. And then we've made some changes to counter orders with regard to saving a structure that you've added to the counter order. So if you build a BOM from scratch on the counter order, we've added the system parameter so that you are able to save that in BOM maintenance when you hit the checkout button. Now, when we created the system parameter, we also had to change the verbiage on an existing system parameter because we've always had this functionality on the quote. But that system parameter was called create standing BOM. So now we had to change the verbiage on that to say create standing BOM on quote. And then, of course, we have this one to tell the system to save it on a counter order. And then if you use the web order import job, so some of you might be using that along with your e-commerce API. We added a system parameter to tell the system how to handle items that are coded as item type both. So if you're familiar with item maintenance, you know that when you set up an item, you have to say what kind of item it is, and there's, 6 options in there. But 3 of them, or one of them is so you either have to say, I can sell this as a stock item, I sell this as a parent item, or both. So of course, when it's bringing those items into the web order import job, is bringing that into a system and trying to create an order for it, it needs to know what to do with a both type item. Am I creating a stock line or am I creating a build line? So we've got, you see that the system parameter is a drop down, so we have 3 options. One is set to always, and that means that those both type items that are imported by the job will always generate built lines. So that means that little build box is going to be checked on the quote line, and it's going to generate a work order. If you set it to never, both type items imported by the job will always generate stock lines. And then the third option is called when unmanaged and unavailable. When we set it to that, that means the job will generate a built line if the item LOC's reorder point is 0 and the available quantity is less than the line quantity. Otherwise, it will create a stock line. Yep.
Is that only for the web order import job, or does that apply to EDI orders and or quote orders?
I think it's just the web order import job. Do you want the case number? 25443. So have you heard of the Ideas Portal? We have this really cool thing called an Ideas Portal. Just the second? Wow. Just the web order input job. Thank you for your suggestion, Mr. Berg. Okay. All right, so we got another biggie. We added a new system parameter regarding EDI matching. So before I explain that, I want to kind of give you a little review of how it was working, how the matching process was working. So when an EDI text file was imported using the EDI inbound invoice import transaction, the system would first attempt to match receipts based on quantity. So it would look at the expected quantity versus the actual, and then it would apply the voucher tolerances from location master maintenance. If that quantity matching failed or the tolerances were exceeded, the process would move on to matching receipts. So it would do a receipt matching. So it's at that point where a lot of users were running into an issue. Because what the system was doing, and it wasn't really, it looked indiscriminate, but it really wasn't. But the end effect is that if it found any sequential group of receipt lines whose sum happened to match that EDI invoice within tolerance, it would group all those lines and create a matched batch, and then it would not do any further validation. So as you can imagine, that created some ugly matching scenarios and some mess downstream. So we have added a new system parameter under the EDI and distranet section of system parameter maintenance. And it is called allow invoice amount receipt matching. So when that's checked, TrulinX will attempt to do invoice amount to receipt amount matching if the normal line quantity amount matching fails. So it's no longer going to match the invoice amount with an exact match and if the amount is within the voucher tolerance. Instead, it's only going to allow a match if the invoice amount and receipt amount is exactly the same. So that's effectively a zero tolerance fallback option. There's some changes to the batch creation logic with this change. So before you could get an unmatched batch and a matched batch, possibly. Now we have the possibility that 4 new batches could be created. So we could have a matched, unmatched, dropship matched, and dropship unmatched. The last change we made in addition to that is we removed the delete text file checkbox from the screen. So if processing succeeds without issue, we're just going to delete the source file. We'll always save a copy of that file in the vendor reports folder on your server, but wherever you downloaded that file to, that's where we'll delete it from if it succeeded. It's pretty crazy. While I was doing some research for this case, I ran across an old photo of Eric Berg capturing his first attempts at EDI invoice matching. He used it as his MySpace profile picture.
And Eric only forgot about it because I complained to him.
I think I saw your name mentioned in the case notes there. Okay, so we have another, we have another system parameter that has a pretty big impact. So before we made this change, or before this, let me start over. Historically, on an order line, the system would determine the cost for margin just on the order and the quote based on the availability of the item. So if it was in stock, it would use average cost to calculate margin. If it wasn't in stock, it would use replacement cost. So I will explain the purpose of this the system parameter in just a moment, but we added a system parameter to force the system to always use vendor replacement cost when recording the order cost, regardless of whether an item is available or not. Now, when it does this, it's still going to, there's still a hierarchy it's going to check for. So the first thing it's going to look for is a special price agreement. If one of those is not there, it's going to go to vendor replacement cost. And then if for some reason there's no vendor replacement cost record, it will use average cost. So the intent, of course, was to align costing with current vendor costs. So you guys know that your vendors are doing a lot of price updates. And if you don't purchase that item very often, then it's going to take a long time for the vendor price updates to catch up to that average cost. So what that would kind of result in is that your profit margin would look higher than it actually was, because that average cost still hadn't caught up to the new changes. So essentially, when a vendor does a price increase, this will allow you to have that increase immediately reflected in your margin. So a couple notes about that change. This is not affecting how the margin is calculated on an invoice. So that's still going to use average cost. Specifically, the change is going to affect quote lines, sales order lines, counter orders, new invoice correction lines, and build for stock work order components. And then you also know that on your quote lines, there's a commission cost. This does not affect anything regarding commission cost, because commission cost doesn't care about item availability. There's another system parameter that controls what cost is used there. So you can use vendor replacement cost or average in that. All right, so we will finish up by talking about some small but valuable changes. So those of you who are using positive pay, so that's just kind of a fraud prevention tool, we have added a couple more bank formats. So one of them was RVest. Most recently, we added Bank of America, and I think it was called BM Harris. And that brings our list. So we have quite a list of bank formats that are available now. So we have CBT, Fifth Third, Huntington, JP Morgan Chase, UMB, Wells Fargo, and then of course you have the option to set it to none if you don't want to use the positive pay functionality. Two new comment types have been added to the return authorization workflow. So you can now create RMA pop-up comments in location master maintenance. And once you enter that return location, then the comments will show up on that pop-up box. Multiple comments of this type for the same location are shown in a list in the same pop-up window, instead of each comment being shown in its own pop-up. And then you also have the ability to add footer comments to your RMA document. So when you are setting up a comment, one of your documents selections will be the RMA footer. We've added an option in the AR statement print to include disputed invoices. So that's an optional checkbox. And if you've been the victim of oh my God, I just lost the, anyway, we have prevented people from adding a component to a structure that matches the BOM parent item number. Circular reference, that's the one I was looking for. So if that happened, we were previously allowing people to add it, not because we thought that was okay, but we never dreamed that people would do it. So there were a couple of people that were the victims of this circular reference. So what would happen is if that structure was on a work order and they tried to open up the work order, if they tried to get into a work order inquiry, it just would spin. And then we would have to go into SQL and delete that component from the structure so they could process that work order. So now we are going to give you this error message if you add a component that matches the BOM parent item. And then finally, we've added a few updates or enhancements to the item put away report. One is that we've added a selection to narrow down the results by receiver user ID. And then you also have the ability to print the location on-hand quantity instead of the bin on-hand quantity. And then if you choose the print sales order detail option, we've added shading to every other line in that sales order detail list. All right, so wrapping up, just make sure you check out the release notes on our self-service center. I did have a couple of things in this presentation that are in release 22.1, which is not expected out until this fall. And one of those things is the Avalara tax integration. So if you're interested in that, I believe right after this session, Tim Mellinger is going to be talking about the Avalara with TrulinX, and he'll be teaching that session with Sasha. So make sure you check that out if you're interested. But thank you guys for being patient, and thanks for listening.